This research paper was given at the Contemporary Gendered Performance and Practice Conference held in April 2013 at Queen's University Belfast. It was organised by then PhD students Megan Minogue and Katrina Riley. The paper is titled Non-Specific Threat: Constructions of Masculinity in Willie Doherty's Video Installations. It expands on issues concerning depictions of violent hypermasculinity in post-conflict, post-agreement Northern Ireland that I edged into in my PhD thesis completed in 2011. In his writing about Willie Doherty's Same Old Story exhibition, published in 1997, Martin McLoone draws comparisons between themes and issues emerging in Doherty's 1990s video works and the Northern Ireland Office's anti-terrorism public information films, which were televised and shown in cinemas in the region. This example from 1993 is called Cats in the Cradle.
Child arrived just the other day. He came to the world in the usual way, but there were planes to catch and bills to pay. He learned to walk while I was away, and he was talking for I knew it. And as he grew, he'd say, I'm gonna be like you, Dad. You know I'm gonna be like you. And the cat's in the cradle and the silver spoon, little boy blue and the man in the moon. When you're coming home, Daddy, don't know when, but we'll get together then. Well, my son turned 10 just the other day. He said, thanks for the ball, Dad, come on, let's play. Can you teach me to throw? I said, not today, I got a lot to do. He said, that's okay, and he walked away, but his smile never did. It said, I'm gonna be like him. You know I'm gonna be like him. Well, I've long since retired, my son's moved away. I called him up just the other day. I said, I'd like to see you, if you don't mind. He said, I'd love to, Dad, if I could find the time. You see, my new job's a hassle and the kids have the flu, but it's sure nice talking to you, Dad. It's been sure nice talking to you. And as I hung up the phone, it occurred to me, he'd grown up just like me. My boy was just like me. And the cat's in the cradle and the silver spoon.
Don't suffer it. Change it. Call the confidential telephone.
When you're coming home, son, I don't know when, but we'll get together then, Dad.
Free phone 0800 666 999. Anything you know can help.
Gonna have a good time then.
McLoone observes that in these films, children and women perform the same essentially sentimental roles as the innocent victims of male violence. Violence is almost exclusively male, and the ultimate victims are the grieving women and children. In this dynamic, women and children are relegated to passive, marginalised roles. Wherever and however data is collected and presented, the statistics confirm that an overwhelming majority of the more than 3,700 official Troubles deaths were male. Valerie Morgan and Grace Fraser also note that the women among the death toll were killed in what could be considered as some of the conflict's most horrific events. Their minority here is reflected in the repression and silencing of women's experiences during the conflict more generally, which often jar with patriarchal ideals of female roles. Morgan and Fraser state, the reality of women's experience within both the Catholic and Protestant religious traditions and in both the North and South jurisdictions has been in the main one of marginalisation and exclusion from power, but this reality has been confounded. by idealised models of women, which have had significant influence on popular thinking about politics and religion. They point out that Catholic women are faced with unattainable standards of the noble Mother Ireland personification of nationalist Ireland, combined with the meek Virgin Mary figure promoted by the faith, while Protestant women are often subjected to domestication and invisibility. This is before we go anywhere near issues which are further crowded out of public discourse, such as domestic abuse, everyday misogyny, and the lack of access to necessary reproductive health care in both Northern Ireland and the Republic. One approach of trying to redress the exclusion of women is to confront toxic masculinity. Several of artist Willie Doherty's video installations can be read as critical responses to hyper-masculine, mediatised representations in which men are depicted as intrinsically violent and non-communicative. Given increasing lone wolf acts of terror perpetrated by white men and perceptible rises in right-wing fascism, it is useful in 2017 to look again at such works. Doherty's practice since the late 1990s, particularly post 9/11, has broadened beyond the Northern Ireland conflict to reflect global experiences of surveillance activity, post-event trauma and anxiety, and what any of us perceive as the other. This shift is also marked by performances by professional actors. When bodies appeared in Doherty's 1990s photographs and videos, they were obscured from view, they were seen partially from behind or in silhouette. Apart from works dealing with the traces of past human activity, the post-2000 videos feature actors around whom the framing is a concern. The ratio of men to women in Doherty's videos is roughly proportionate to the gendered statistics relating to the conflict. I haven't crunched the numbers on this, folks, so please don't quote me on it. It's just an observation. And the few videos that do feature women's bodies and or voices tend to concern victimhood. So, for example, videos such as Closure from 2005 and Ancient Ground in 2011 explore trauma and loss from women's perspectives, while non-specific Threat and Passage tease out the tropes of representing conflictual masculinity. The latter two provide examples of how Doherty's videos examine the cinematic elements that combine to construct on-screen masculinity and the threat of male violence. These elements are the actors' performances both on screen and in voiceover narration, the cinematography, the way shots are cut and sequenced, the high contrast noir-like lighting, and the settings of underpasses and warehouses. Notions of maleness and territory, placelessness and timelessness, and how the actors interact with, or indeed do not interact with, space also beg discussion. The following analysis outlines the ways that the videos show how film language uses generalised perceptions about masculine violence to portray the men as intimidating, even though their actions are in fact basic and abstracted. Non-Specific Threat is a single-channel, 8-minute looped video installation projected onto a wall or screen in a dark space. It features a youngish man standing in an abandoned warehouse, seen in constant slow-moving inward 360-degree tracking shot happening around him. He is white, he wears a denim jacket, a black shirt and a thick neck chain. His shaved head with this look perhaps associates him with skinheads or neo-Nazis, while his steely facial expression and firm military-like stance make him look threatening. The following clip gives a sense of how these visual elements play with the voiceover.
I will make your dreams come true. You can be like me. There will be no telephones.
I am any color you want me to be. I am any religion you want me to be. I am the embodiment of everything you despise. There will be no water. I am invisible. I disappear in a crowd. There will be no electricity.
I'll discuss Kenneth Branagh's voiceover after outlining notable elements of Colin Stewart's performance in that video. As Doherty would have known when casting for this work and its accompanying photographic series, Colin Stewart appeared in the 2003 BBC television film Holy Cross, which is a dramatised reconstruction of a period of violence in Belfast in 2001. When schoolgirls from a Catholic nationalist background passed through a Protestant loyalist area to reach the Holy Cross primary school. For viewers who are aware of this link, his presence and stature already bear the connotations of the stereotypical portrayal of the working class loyalist thug. In a steady anti-clockwise motion, the camera circles the actor while framing him in a medium head and shoulders close-up. He is lit from above, casting shadows over his eyes and neck while illuminating his pale skin, producing a kind of skull-like appearance. The spotlighting on him only partially illumines his surroundings, with angular shapes and shadows appearing behind him as the camera moves around his static figure. It seems to be the interior of an abandoned industrial or storage space, now empty and its walls covered in graffiti. Occasional glimpses of nature are visible through the open door when it comes into the moving frame. The space is loaded with associations of criminal or covert behaviours involving violent acts. Kidnapping, torturing and executions occurred in spaces like this during the conflict, particularly in areas beyond urban zones and yet not quite in rural zones, something in between. But viewers may also understand the setting's visual coding from the likes of gangster movies and crime thrillers. Stewart's facial expression changes subtly with every orbit of the camera, conveying moods and feelings like anger, determination, pain, perhaps even anxiety. With every revolution, the camera probes at the surface image of this stock character, whose hard exterior begins to rupture and become vulnerable as the voiceover progresses. On trying to read and form understanding from such abstracted images, Jean Fisher states that technologies of the visual elide the fact that all forms of representation are displacements from an assumed point of origin that is henceforth absent and inaccessible. We are then at the mercy of interpretation, but if seeing is also an act of interpretation, then in a mediated world, whose point of view are we seeing from? As this slide shows, most of the short statements made in the voiceover begin with I, but who the I refers to is unclear. Fisher suggests that it becomes progressively more uncertain whether the voice is a projection of his thoughts or ours, whether we are the victims of his prejudice or he is the victim of ours. It is also unclear whether the he on screen is equal to the he in the audio. The examples shown confront ways of seeing and ways of being seen. They draw attention to how we construct our interior and exterior lives according to how we think others see us, and the constructions of identity we project onto others based on our interpretations of their external appearance or actions. Many of the lines are transferable across a range of scenarios. I am part of your life. I am a caricature. You create me. These lines could refer to mediated figures like Hollywood actors or characters as much as they evoke any terrorist or criminal appearing on a news broadcast. The dark places the statements go to, I am the face of evil, perhaps reminds us that before 9/11, the face of domestic terrorism in the Western world at least was the white man, perhaps in a lot of the rest of the world as well. So, but in a sort of internal sense, this could be the nationalist freedom fighter or equally the unionist defender, each the face of evil to the other, and each the victim to the other, each knowing the other's desires, each understanding their mutual dependence in binary opposition. War can only persist as long as there are two sides of the story. Kenneth Branagh's voice performing these words is significant. His plummy Southern English accent and calm-paced diction are disjunctive against the brutish image of the man in the video. However, Branagh was born to a working-class Protestant family who left Belfast for Reading in England in the late 1960s when the Northern Ireland conflict broke out. Had they stayed, there may not have been any real difference between perceptions of the man on screen and the actuality of the unseen man speaking with, or indeed against him. Branagh's assimilated accent, like that of so many young people who left the region for Britain, was an act of preservation to avoid bullying. His life away from a community underpinned by anti-intellectualism and anti-art sentiment afforded him the opportunity to become a renowned writer, actor and director. Non-specific threat invites a re-evaluation of our perceptions of others and how we form them. It collapses distinctions between good and bad. It invites us to see that we've really seen nothing at all, and that any conclusions we draw from its audiovisual information are in fact unfounded. When broken down into the man is bad because he's bald, wearing a denim jacket and standing alone in what seems to be an empty warehouse, the case doesn't hold water. It is the language of audiovisual production that suggests something untoward, and it is the viewer who might imagine that he's waiting for the rest of his gang, or wonder if we're encountering him before or after his involvement in a violent incident, or if he's an undercover police officer, or any multitude of options. In falling down these rabbit holes, we may ask questions for which there are no answers, and there are no answers because Doherty's videos depict moments of betweenness, transition, moments not rooted to place or time or incident. They just are in the moment without beginning or end. Passage from 2006 further demonstrates this with repeated non-encounters between two men played by Michael Liebman and Kieran McMenamin, both of whom are wearing outfits very like Stuart's in Non-Specific Threat. Passage is again an 8-minute long single channel projection. Similarities to the earlier non-specific threat include the appearance of the youngish white men in denim jackets, mostly framed with their heads and shoulders illuminated, while the rest of the frame is dark and in soft focus. The camera is also restless, constantly moving. This time though, it moves with the figures, and the cutting and rerunning of variations of the abstracted actions escalates the tension in the appearance of the men striding towards one another. The setting is outdoors, a kind of no man's land with markers of territory. The distant sound of traffic, perhaps from the flyover, vaguely perceptible overhead as the men pass one another, marks the space as beyond and between rural and urban spaces, while the warehouse in non-specific threat is a static enclosure also in a placeless place. The setting in Passage, as indicated by the title, is a space of transition where moving bodies must keep moving. As before, some film language coding that viewers tend to be unaware of, at least consciously, may encourage us to perceive a conflict between the men and to take sides, even though their repeated passing comes to nothing. For instance, we're likely to identify with McMenamin because he appears first, although we have to bear in mind the looped projection in exhibition. In this first appearance, if we take it as that, he moves from the viewer's left to right, so the direction of reading in much of the West, which gives a sense of natural narrative flow. His hair, albeit cropped, marks him as different and perhaps less severe to what we might perceive of Stewart or Liebman because of their shaved heads. They also both seem to have sterner looking faces, while McMenamin's looks quite worried. To a greater degree than Stewart, due to their relative fame, the actors in Passage bring more baggage with them. McMenamin and Liebman both have substantial acting careers. Notably, Liebman has a named role in Holy Cross, while Stewart played a minor unnamed character. And interestingly, the Enniskillen-born McMenamin has worked largely in British productions, and quite a lot has played heroes and lovable rogue types, while the US-born Liebman has featured in a lot more Northern Irish productions, including playing the hyper-violent Protestant thug Willie Lamb in Resurrection Man from 1994. The situation of two men walking towards one another is also coded as tension builds with every cut. There is an inherent threat in them pacing from opposite directions, as if it is the build-up to a violent clash. The close framing and the sequencing of shot reverse shots, which adhere to the 30 and 180 degree rules, repeatedly set the action up for an anticlimax when the men pass and nothing really happens, instead of the clash that the film language might lead viewers to expect. They simply glance back at one another, and the video cuts to retakes in which they have switched sides. As shown in this screenshot of Liebman, this glancing back after they have passed takes place near an underpass, with the bridge or flyover discernible in the out-of-focus background. In these moments of two bodies passing in an outdoor space, which is a placeless place, and images evoking passageways, the passage of the title begins to unfold for us. While the video structure ruptures the linear passage of time, it also refers to specifically male rites of passage. How the actors perform and embody these different meanings of passage indicates a further disruption of constructed masculinity. As with Stewart in Non-Specific Threat, there are subtle shifts in their facial expressions. In the quick glances as they pass, we might read apprehension, fear, confusion, hatred, or recognition, and so on and so forth. It's really very subjective. These actions, again abstracted from narrative, and indeed these would be transitory moments in a narrative, and how they've been filmed and sequenced, demonstrate how Doherty's work excavates and reveals the ways that conventional narrative constructions manipulate and kind of train passive viewers of film and television to unconsciously and unquestioningly understand the media language attributed to character types. The refilmed sequences in Passage show how easily the impression of an imminent conflict that is not necessarily there can be created and conveyed. These men are pitted against each other purely through suggestive cinematic language. Fisher says of these men, if they seem locked in a social imaginary of mutual suspicion, it may equally be our paranoid projection. The way they are presented indicates to spectators that they are to be suspected. It requires critical thinking and an apprehensive approach to media language to give them the benefit of the doubt. However, that's easier said than done when you're immersed in a community and/or a culture that is hardwired to feel trepidation around the other. There is much work to do to overcome such fears. It's difficult to undo the perception of youngish white men with shaved heads wearing denim jackets, whose presence at once seems ordinary and threatening. And is it the sense of threat that is ordinary? Has feeling threatened become normalised? And it would appear so, given the anxiety that builds as the men pace towards one another in the different versions of the same event. When watching the video in installation, the projection loop means that there is no evident beginning or end and no clear way of telling which sequences have been refilmed and which are playing again in the loop. In the post-conflict context, this recalls tropes of the same old story being retold again and again with slight variations as memories, stories and histories and understandings change over time. To round up, in non-specific threat and Passage, the men are passive, enacting only minimal passive actions, and yet the way these actions are shaped by the elements of film language, so the cinematography, editing, lighting, costumes, sound, performances and so on, leads the implied viewer to project onto them the non-specific, generalised threat of white male violence. In laying bare such mediated and mediatised constructions, the videos encourage the questioning of the truth-telling qualities inherent in photographic representation and susceptibility to judgments formed only from reading the surface image. Just as Doherty's work often reveals different ways of seeing the same event or indeed non-event, it shows different ways of seeing outer appearances. And finally, it is the need to work through toxic masculinity and the focus in the media on men in general and in conflict that relegate women's roles to established constructions of femininity, that women should be indoors, unseen and unheard, and whose emotional anguish is all part of the collateral damage of violence and war. More than a decade after the first exhibition of these video installations, the issues they confront remain unresolved, and if there is a repetition in the themes and issues of Doherty's work, and he is one of many artists still contributing these points to culture globally, then it is because history never seems to cease repeating, rerunning and re-performing them. In that case, I think it's about time we changed the narrative. If you find this presentation interesting or useful, please subscribe to my YouTube channel and share it on your networks. If you feel able to make a financial contribution of any amount at all to this freelance work that I'm doing, please consider donating in British pounds via paypal.me/PEA Blair or pledging in US dollars on patreon.com/PEA Blair. where you can also find links to my audio recordings, blogs and publications, and read more about my plans for developing a website and educational resources on audiovisual cultures. Thank you so much for watching. If you've reached to the end, well done, and I hope to see you very soon.